everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the Big Doug and Carmy Show, your one-stop shop for all things Commanders. It's an Inside the Command Center Friday, and to get you all the action, get you ready for the game on Sunday, Grant Paulsen from 106.7 The Fan is here. Grant, what's up, buddy?
What's going on? Good to see you again, Big Doug. How are you?
I'm doing great, buddy. Thank you for squeezing me into what's obviously a busy day. Let's get right to the action. Grant, before the season started, I was on this very podcast telling everybody that will listen how deep the DB room is and how it would be a strength of the unit. Obviously, injuries have crushed this team in a way that I can't remember. Maybe you've been around this team as long as I have, if not been longer. I can't really remember last time that injuries have hit the team this way this early, but certainly the DB room is not the strongest unit on the team anymore. What are we to do about it?
It's a good question. I think they're paying the piper a little bit unfairly from last year when they were incredibly healthy. And this was one of my huge concerns this offseason, right? There's a lot of things I've gotten wrong about this team, including the
Mm, Well, let's see. We're going to scrap here. Technology is something, huh? We'll
was
get
that
you
on
back.
me? Yeah,
Yeah,
was that on my
yeah,
wireless?
I think so.
Hmm. I wonder if I'm not in a good enough spot. Um, should I move to a different location?
Maybe if it happens again, let's roll and see what happens.
All right, cool. Three, two, one. Yeah, so it's a good question. I mean, for me, I was worried about their health coming into the season, both based on their age and based on the fact that they were so healthy last year, Doug. You just don't get that year over year in the National Football League very often. And so when you have the kind of year where they stay as healthy as they did last year, where you had kind of the one big significant key long term injury with John Allen with the pec, I think it was, you kind of got to pay the piper here oftentimes, and that's not fair, but that's how it goes. And I think that's what's happened, and these injuries are piling up. But yeah, I was also wrong about the secondary in a sense. So far, it's been a rough go for Marshawn Lattimore. Clearly, last year was not better. In fact, it was worse. But I did think as he got healthier and further removed from his injury and got more indoctrinated and comfortable in the defense, he played at a higher level. That hasn't really happened yet. I think in some cases, specifically in the Atlanta game, some of that had to do with pass rush not helping him on some of the deeper shots he had to defend on an island. And as always, it's never really as bad as everybody thinks when you're the punching bag on the team, which he has clearly become. But it hadn't been great. You know, Mikey Sandristel, who's beloved and certainly one of my favorite players, and I think a lot of people's favorite players on this team, has also played very, very poorly. You don't hear as much about that, obviously, because he's a guy that has some deposits in the bank who we like a lot more as a fan base, I think, based on last season. And he's a rising, budding star, it feels like. But it hadn't been pretty for him either. So there's clearly something going on back there where you've got multiple guys struggling. I think the safety position's in flux now with the Will Harris injury, Percy Butler, who's more important maybe than people realize as a depth guy, out as well. So you're plugging in Darnell Savage days after being signed. He gives up a touchdown. You know, you're plugging in Jeremy Reeves, who's mostly played special teams to play a lot of defense. And you're going to have communicational issues when dudes that don't normally play together like that or Tyler Owens are all out there trying to communicate with Antonio Hamilton, who's plucked off the practice squad. So I think that's been a big part of the issues on the secondary. But they got to get it fixed because a year ago at this time they'd given up, I think it was like 140-yard play. This year it's five already. I mean, that's not going to work.
2 weeks ago, I think it was, Joe Witt said that they had toned down the plays that they were using, made the language a little easier for guys to understand, let them run freer a little bit. I'm not sure if they added more on or what happened there. I'm curious. It's interesting with Sanders. You brought him up. He's only played corner for a couple of years now. Last year, he was supposed to be the nickel. They obviously, because of injuries or lack of good play from the corners, moved him outside. Right. I wonder. It'd be tough with Lattimore, I think, but I wonder at what point do you consider moving Center back outside, bringing Igbenogany back into the nickel where he's more than capable of playing, and running it that way like you did last year, where at least you feel like Trey Amos on the other side is an upgrade? Again, I think it'd be rough to tell Lattimore he's got to sit, but that's the job of the coach, right? I mean, at what point do you consider doing that?
So I think it will be a consideration inevitably if they continue to struggle. I don't think we're there yet. I get that it feels like we're there a quarter way
Yes.
through the year at 2-2, but they are 4 games in to the marathon here. I guess to directly answer your question, I would say if you fast forward, 2 or 3 weeks, and maybe it's closer to two. Maybe it's this LA game, which defensively I think should be a good game for them because of the state of that offensive line being in shambles. We should talk about that. But I think because you're going to get to Herbert, who's been pressured 50 times the last 2 games. You look at his first 2 weeks, he was playing like an MVP. The last 2 weeks, he's completely fallen off, and it's because he's quite literally just running for his safety at this point. I mean, he can't set up in the pocket and deliver a football. It's staggering when you watch the tape the last couple of weeks. They got 2 tackles playing now who are bottom 9 tackles in the NFL because they've lost 2 fringe all pros on the outside, and they got injuries on the interior. But other than that, everything's going great for their O line.
He's been
But
hit
anyway,
26 times in the last 2 games.
yeah, it's wild, man. So I think they'll be able to get pressure. With the pressure comes the ball coming out faster. With the ball coming out faster, that's your best friend if you're in the secondary. Some of those plays we've seen Lattimore and others struggle on, like the little out and up that Drake London ran for 43 yards. You can't make that throw if you don't have a clean pocket and Penix isn't hitching and climbing and having all day to crow hop into the throw on a double move. So I think this will fix itself a little bit this week, hopefully with more pressure. I think some of that's got to be on Joe Witt too. Oh, by the way, because schematically they've gotten more conservative since the Green Bay game, in my opinion. I think he's got to maybe not this week necessarily, because again, I think you should be able to win with 4, but you got to dial more blitzes up. You got to get back to being as aggressive as they were in the early games of the season. But the answer is, I think you give them another game or two, like you reassess after the Chargers. If after 2 weeks, Lattimore is not able to play some pretty clean football, minimal flags, not giving up big chunks, then I think you do have to consider that. Primarily because of the Sanders point too. Like, what's Mikey playing like? I mean, Mikey was so good last year outside on the boundary, and it even though this is his natural position, it hasn't looked anything like that in the early going this year. So I wonder about that, Doug. I wonder about, I think this is their highest ceiling setup. Is Lattimore outside with Amos, who's legit, and then Sanders still inside, where I think he could be maybe a Pro Bowler down the road. That's certainly what the evaluation was in the building coming into the year. Like, they know this, that is your best secondary at its peak. But if you can't get to that peak, either because it's not working with somebody, or maybe Lattimore's not what you thought he was, or whatever, then you have a higher floor the other way, because we saw it last year. So at some point, maybe you tap into that.
Yeah, you mentioned their O-line banged up, both tackles out, guys you've never heard of that they've just brought in, probably playing there, if not Jamari Sawyer's back out to tackle. Bradley Bozeman, not good at center. But here's the thing, the defensive line for the Commanders, Grant, feels like it's just as banged up as that offensive line on some levels. I mean, you're talking about Dietrich Wise out, Jean Baptiste out. Is Deron Payne? What is going on with Deron Payne's knee? Sounds like that was not that he's not quite right. So I worry about when you got if Jacob Martin ends up or a revived Preston Smith becomes your next edge. Like, this is a team that was in the top of the league in pressure rate through 3 games. And while I agree they should be able to feast on this offensive line, that defensive line's banged up too.
It is, but I think that from a pass rushing standpoint specifically, I think the guys that they're counting on to get home are mostly on the field
Yeah.
and fine. Dorrance Armstrong, who was leading the league in pressures and pressure percentage through 3 games, is going to play. He's got to eat. Like, you paid him good money. You brought him in here. Dan Quinn kind of handpicked him from Dallas to come over here, and you saw why at the end of last year. I mean, he had a stretch coming into this past week where he had 6.5 sacks in 6 games because he had eaten in the playoffs, if you remember.
He
So
did.
it is time for him to have a big game. They signed Von Miller as kind of the last piece, and it felt like an oh by the way kind of move based on when it happened before camp. This was something that they had in the back of their mind. They were going to sign an edge, probably Von Miller, but if it didn't work out, somebody like him all off season. And they knew the veteran, the type of guy they were looking for. I don't need him here in the spring. He doesn't want to be here in the spring. We'll get him in here. It's like that was a big part of their offseason, frankly, and it was a big bet that they made. You didn't prioritize or draft an edge early that could get to the quarterback. And that was one of the things coming out of the draft. Everyone goes, wow, that's pretty stunning because they had a plan, but the plan's got to work, right? So I think we've seen some decent things from Von Miller. He's got a sack and a half, but he has not had the pass rushing impact necessarily that I was hoping for just yet. Again, it's early, but we're about a quarter of the way through the year. He's not going to play a lot of snaps. So this is not a guy that's going to go out and have, 9 pressures and 4 sacks or something. But you want him to be able to be impactful and to flash and to get a pressure in a big spot, hit a quarterback in a big spot. I think this is the kind of game where he could do that. I was actually on the air yesterday. We did some bold predictions. I was saying I think he's going to have multiple sacks like this. You're back in your old division against an old rival, and you're on the road out west, going back cross country. I think this feels like a Von Miller game, but it needs to be. You mentioned Jacob Martin. He can rush the passer. Like he's a good player when you get him matched up correctly. And then your interior guys are allowed to make an impact too. I mean, lest we forget, Johnny Newton was a 36th overall pick who was drafted because he could push the pocket. I loved this pick. I screamed into a megaphone how much I love this guy at Illinois watching him. It hadn't translated yet, and he doesn't even play a lot right now because of the rotation. But there's no reason he can't win and get up the field. Deron Payne has been a much better year, I think, this year than last year already through the 4 games. But this is a game. Why can't he take over? So I think you're right. They've lost pieces. Wise was going to be really important against the run as a big bodied guy. You saw that John Baptiste was doing some good things. He's hurt. That stinks. That hurts your depth. There's no doubt. So Preston Smith and maybe a Jalen Holmes or something like those guys start to play a little more. But there is absolutely no reason with what they have that against this offensive front they can't get home. If you can't do that this week, then we got really, really big problems around these parts with this group.
That's right. It feels like Jordan McGee is a fan favorite, but I wouldn't lump him into one of those fan favorites that are kind of like pie in the sky type deal because, as you well know, the front office and the staff are really high on this guy. Why can't we get him on the field when we know speed is a problem at the linebacker spot right now?
Yeah, so it's a good question. So, first of all, I don't have a good answer for that because I actually would play him some. I don't know what that looks like. It would depend on, I think, matchup, down in distance, sequence, personnel from the opponent, right? So it's hard to, I'm not going to say I want him in on X percent of snaps because I think every game is going to be a different game situation, matchup, whatever. But here's where I'll agree with you. You heard Joe Witt say in his press conference on Thursday, he said, basically, we try to avoid our linebackers, running with speed or something like that. I can't remember the exact word he used, but it's something to that effect. And he's like, and that was the B. John Robinson matchup. Now, did that go worse because Bobby got picked on a mesh concept? Yes. But that is a dead play from the jump for Washington's defense when you got 54 who does so many things well. It's not a knock of him, but he does 9 things brilliantly, and there's one thing at this point he just can't do. And that thing is what he was asked to do on that play. So you tip your cap to Zach Robinson. He beat Joe Witt there, right? But there are plays where you can't avoid that. And that's to your point, what you're talking about. I do think on some obvious passing downs, when maybe the sticks are far enough down the field where you feel like it's check down time or let's get the ball out to the running back or, an obvious pass rushing, situation where maybe you're throwing the ball to the back because, guys are coming. Maybe that is a spot to mix in Jordan McGee. I also don't really get, like, we have so many other spots in this league now where teams rotate why there's this insistence for Washington to have 100% of snaps necessarily
Right.
from their 35-year-old linebacker. Really, really good. I don't know that anybody's better playing phone booth linebacker between the tackles, getting dudes on the ground, fitting. Like, he is awesome. And I would even say, by the way, he is as good as there is at a traditional Mike linebacker still right now as a downhill blitzer. Like, you saw it in the Raiders game. I think
Yep.
he's awesome at that. It's like it's incredible to me how good he is still. Future Hall of Famer who hasn't lost much. But the speed part of it, I'd have to go way, way back in his career. But I don't remember the last several years that ever really being like a strength. And so, yeah, teams are going to try to exploit that. That's the job. So I would counter. You have to have a counterpunch.
Let's get to the offense, and obviously, it's fantastic to have Jaden back. Sounds like maybe he could have last week. Maybe it would have been nice to have won that since it was an NFC game. I personally was glad that they held him out in what may been an abundance of caution. I'm fine with that. Um, how does and I know Cliff talked about it a little bit, but are you worried at all on Sunday? One, that's a defense that is not good against running quarterbacks, which makes me happy. But also, you don't want him running a ton, right? I mean, the brace is going to be on, the knee's still probably not 100%, but you can't convince a kid that's been faster than everybody not to run the ball. It's part of what makes him special, right? So I wonder what the coaching staff can do to kind of hint, hint, wink, wink. Don't run unless you absolutely have to.
I don't think they can. I don't think they will. Honestly,
Yeah.
I
Okay.
think that's why he didn't play last weekend, though. Right? I mean,
Right.
so let's go back 2 weeks ago when they first play the Raiders, and people were like, "Oh, they're holding him out. Good for them." I don't think that was the reality. I think he was not able to physically play in the football game, and had he have played, it would have been pretty ill-advised. It would have just been a guy wanting to take care of his teammates and be there for them. But we would have all seen physically this does not make sense. So that was an easy one. My sense is this weekend was, as you said, a little bit different where maybe he would have looked a lot closer to like Jaden Daniels. Probably not 100%, but I think that's why they made the decision they did, and they waited until now because they know there's no such thing as getting him out there with training wheels and saying, "Hey, dude, don't run." Nobody scrambles more than this guy in the league. I mean, that's
Right.
not my opinion. That's a fact. That is
Yep.
since the beginning of last year, and to some extent, it's his superpower, and it's the secret sauce for this offense, and it keeps them ahead of the sticks, and it made them elite last year. It also, over time, could become a bit of a flaw because you want to hang in the pocket and make more throws and make more plays, and I think you'll see that as he just continues to develop, right? But when people will compare him to the other top running quarterbacks, last year it was Lamar was the number one rushing quarterback. He was number two in the NFL. Lamar way more yard intensive on designed runs than Jaden Daniels. Daniels scrambles, and that was the big discrepancy between the two. Now, would I design more runs for him? Because I think it is a way to kind of get him out of harm's way, maybe, and get him in positions where maybe he can get down and get to the sideline. I probably would. The scramble thing is what scares me more. I believe that he got injured on the scramble, but like that's just to me, and this is there's no science on this that I know of, but in my mind, the scramble is like, oh, gotta go. And you're like kind of off schedule and it's very spontaneous and you're kind of looking around, not knowing where guys are and making moves. A little different than the design where you know where you're going, you know who the defenders are. So those plays worry me more. But it's what he's going to do. It's why he's exceptional. It's why he's the man. So you can't play him if running is a problem. That's kind of where I've been all along. My guess is it no longer is. I think it could look a little awkward, and people might go, "What? Well, it's not quite." But
Yeah.
I think the gait changes when you put on a knee brace that's the
I see.
size of a ladder. You know what I'm saying? Like,
Yeah.
so we'll see. My only nervousness, and that's just me knowing nothing about anything sitting here, is like I have seen a lot of guys over the years that have this awkwardness when they try to like slide and bend and get down with their knee brace, and sometimes even the knee brace getting stuck in the ground. And now you're talking about turf out in LA, all those things. So I got all those anxieties kind of floating around in the head, but I think by and large, they're not playing the franchise if he's not ready. It's been now, we're going to be over 3 weeks removed from
Right.
the injury, which I was originally told when he'd had the MRI, there was some concern he could miss games, and it could be a few week thing. So I think they waited, they did it right. Everybody's been careful, and if he's playing, he's going to he's going to play like Jaden Daniels.
Did any you listen to all the press conferences I do too. Maybe I missed it. I was surprised that not one beat reporter asked them after that Packers game, why on earth, when he gets hurt, there was no chance of winning that game. Like, I don't understand why he was even still in the game running the ball when that game was not winnable.
That's a great question. I honestly haven't thought about that at all. I don't think it was asked. Look, I covered. Everyone hates the idea of bringing up Robert Griffin. with Jaden Daniels. It's like this PTSD thing. I'm not comparing the two. However, in this context, I think this is moderately interesting. So I covered that beat, and I was there for every day, practice, games, what have you, embedded with the team back in 2012. And I remember at that time when I would talk to the Shanahans about it, like it was a different situation because there was an element of like the player and the owner against the staff in a sense too. They felt like, however, I think you're trying to build a relationship, right? And so what they should have done, I think Robert would say this now. I would hope Mike and Kyle would say this now, is just say, hey, we're protecting you from yourself. You have to do that. In fact, I think I saw Griffin come out and say something along these lines a couple of weeks ago. But there is this element of like, I don't know if wanting to be liked is the right phrase, but you're still learning the player, you're still building this rapport. I think it's hard when a guy's begging you and telling you, I'm fine, I'm fine, I'm fine. And there isn't a lot of history of like, how does he play through injuries? I mean, in Jaden's case, he played through a broken rib. He's super tough. But most guys, if they hurt something in the knee, are going to be like, I can't go. But it's like a pitcher who might never tell you they're out of gas and they want to finish the inning. You don't really have that knowledge yet. You're still learning him in that way. So I think it's complicated in game. And the only other thing I would say is, even though that Packers game felt like they were down 30, it was actually close in the second half. I think it was at points like a one possession game.
Yeah.
I know after the garbage time touchdown, it certainly was. But I don't think they were ever down. I'd have to remember, but by more than like 13 or 14, even though it felt like it was 100. And we all know that at no point were they winning that game. So I'll bet you if they were down by 17 or 20 or something, it might have been a different conversation possibly.
Dan Quinn said Brandon Coleman was a coach's decision. That Friday he had practiced. I know he had, I think the shoulder was what he was dealing with. Then Cliff Kingsbury says, well, the shoulder wasn't quite right, so it was an injury thing. Probably somewhere in the middle. What's the rub with Brandon Coleman?
So I don't think, barring having missed something along the way and them keeping a pretty good secret, like there are issues with him, off the field in the sense of like
Sure.
meeting room or any of that. And by all accounts, I'll just use, the platform to say my interactions with this guy, I find him to be one of the most pleasant, nice players on the
Mhm.
team. I mean, legitimately, a couldn't be. It's almost amazing that he can play football at a high level as an angry offensive lineman getting after your ass. Because like he could not be a sweeter, nicer guy from my interactions with him. That's number one. Number two, honestly, here's how I see it. So he played left tackle. I thought he was okay. I actually probably thought he was better than they did. They're right. I'm wrong, I'm sure. But I didn't have a major issue with him at left tackle. I thought for a year one guy who was a third round pick, you could have gone forward into this season and it wouldn't have been the biggest deal. I love the trade for Laramie Tunsil. You upgraded. Anytime you can go get a top five pass protector when you've got a franchise QB who's young, do that. So Brandon Coleman, respectfully, you were fine. Now you got to move to right tackle. So that was their plan, right? So they kick him over to the right side. Then they draft Josh Connolly, who they fell in love with in the pre-draft process. They didn't think was going to be there on draft night. Okay, so now you've lost right tackle because this is our 12-year guy that we love in our offense. He's a little bit more athletic and better feed, and he can get out in the screen stuff and whatever else. So, okay, you put him at right tackle. So now you call Coleman for the second time in the offseason. You tell him, hey, now you're our left guard. But don't worry, like we're not moving you again. This is your spot, right? Well, I think what happened was he's big. I mean, he's a really big guy. I think he has struggled with power and with guys that kind of bull rush and get underneath of you inside at guard, where you've got like the squattier, maybe sometimes thicker, more physical, just pocket pushers. And I think it has been more of a problem for him than at tackle, where you're able to kind of, get your pass set and drop and anchor and some of those things and use your length a little better. I think he has struggled with kind of guys getting up underneath of him and kind of pushing him back. So this is now a technique thing I'm guessing that he's got to address or figure out. Okay, how do I get the most out of myself as a guy that he's kind of a tweener, right? He looks more like a tackle size wise, but he played, and a lot of people saw him as more of a guard, right? He's got the length to be a tackle. So all of these things are to say, I just think there's work to be done for him in certain capacities inside. And right now, they think Chris Paul's better. That's what I think it comes down to. Who
Okay.
is physical and is a mauler and is a natural guard and hasn't messed around or ever played tackle, and I don't think has some of those same issues. How alarmed should we be? How worried should we be about a third round pick taking a step back? I guess, fairly significantly because it's year two for a third round pick, and he's gone from one position to another to the bench. Like just that's a bad trajectory.
Yes.
But I still have hope. I mean, I don't think he's ever played that badly. Like maybe I'm crazy. Even when he got benched this year, I was a little surprised. I thought
Mhm.
he struggled, okay, but like that was through two games. I mean, I thought Connerly, and it's more noticeable because he's outside on an island. But like, if you told me one of those guys was going to have a couple week respite, I would have thought it would have been Josh, who I'm still high on. So clearly, they're seeing things that I don't see, and they should. That's their job, and they always will. Um, but I think he'll be okay. I'm not super concerned. But it is interesting as I think about it. Now you're talking about Ben Sinnott was a second round pick who,
Yes.
isn't catching the ball. He's done a nice job as a blocker, but is utterly uninvolved in the passing game in year two. Mikey Sanders still has taken a step back this year.
Johnny
I'm
Newton
not.
doesn't play much.
Johnny Newton is not playing a whole lot.
The
Yeah.
draft looks
So
tough.
but Jaden Daniels will save your bacon
That's
on
right.
that a little bit. And I think some of these guys, like we're taking a snapshot. I'll bet you in 8 weeks, if I come back on with you, we'll feel better about where Sanders still is, where Coleman is.
That's
God
right.
willing, Ben Sinnott's caught a couple balls since then. Like
Yeah. Well, that blocking that he was able to show probably should at least get him more reps. Maybe they got to think about getting into 13 personnel because he was very effective with the blocking, and hopefully that will get him some more targets. With Noah Brown and Terry McLaurin out, would you consider not using Debo in the return game at least for a couple of weeks?
so I'm the wrong guy to ask because I've said all along I wouldn't use Debo in the return game.
Right.
And
Even if
I
it's at
don't.
least a series after those returns, right?
Totally. Not
Yeah.
only that, so like it's just a health thing. I think when Debo Samuel's not available, which in his career is going to happen if you're just following the tea leaves, this offense becomes a much different looking group that I like a lot less on paper. Like their offense goes through him right now. I mean, he is like even the stuff that isn't touching when the ball doesn't touch his hands, they're doing something with him to attract attention. Eye candy in the backfield with jet action and orbit stuff deep behind the quarterback, or they'll have him running some of these like deep overs in the middle of the field and come back to somebody. Like there's always an element of where's Debo for the defense.
Mhm.
There, for many years in the past, I think you started the day when you're prepping for this team. Obviously now it's Jaden Daniels, right? But I'm talking about sheerly from the skill group. You would say, all right, how are they using Terry McLaurin? Let's watch the tape. Where does he line up? What do we need to take away? Now that's Debo Samuel. So I work back from that to say this is a guy that has a long injury history. He's one of the most physical, violent players in the league with the ball. He takes so much contact because of that. There was this one play, I think it was the Raiders game, where like he was at the sideline and he could easily have just angled out of bounds. And he like turned it upfield for like this car crash of a collision that would have left me, laying on the field for weeks, right? But that's Debo. And like he was mic'd up. So I even went back to see if that was like anything on that, on like the NFL stuff after. And he was like talking about it on the sideline. And he was just like, I'll never go out of bounds there. Like that's football, And I'm like, and that is why I've had you in fantasy for 10 years and there's been a Q next to your name every single week. You know what I'm saying? So like
True.
long winded, but my point is I don't need this guy ramming it into the kickoff return at 100 miles an hour. Having said that, I think we know why they're doing it. He's number
Sure.
one in the league in kick returns. He's incredible at it. He's already almost ripped off a couple of touchdowns. He's ripped returns across midfield 2 or 3 times. But my point has been, I think you can do that. Maybe not to the same extent, but let's say you get 85, 90% of that from Luke.
Right.
If it helps keep Debo a little bit healthier, isn't that worth it to give a little bit on that? And right now, your number one kick returner in the league is Debo Samuel. Your number two kick returner in the league is Luke McCaffrey. And last week, when he didn't return kicks because they had all those injuries, to your point, they still had a huge day. And Luke still had the big return and went for 199, I think it was. So it's a little bit of proof for my theory that I think they'll be okay, even if he's not back there. Sure, I guarantee you he'll run trying to kick for a touchdown this year at some point. and
Yeah.
he might do it twice. And I'm not saying that wouldn't be massive and change games, but if he misses a game or two because of something, or even just a compounding body,
Bigger
hit.
deal.
Yeah, like
Yeah.
that. I would rather not have the kick return touchdown than
Yeah.
not have him on offense for a couple of weeks.
All right. I know you got to roll. We'll get you out on this. I always ask my guest on Friday to help me put together a parlay. So, Amari and Hampton over under 67.5 rushing yards.
Under.
Jaden Daniels over under 8.5 rushing attempts. Here, hold on. Let me put this away. You said under for Hampton.
I did, yeah. Eight
Okay.
and a half attempts, you said?
That's rushing attempts.
Ooh, this one's really hard
Yeah.
because I would say he'll turn down the faders on trying to run in his return. But the Chargers are terrible at defending the quarterback run, and they've given up explosives, and I actually think that's an area where Washington can move the ball. Damn, this is hard. I think it's like right at that 7-8 number. I'm gonna say over.
Okay. Because I'll play this one. So I'm going to hold you to it.
All right.
Herbert, Herbert over under 265.5 passing yards.
I will say over. It's hard to watch this secondary and not say otherwise. Now,
I don't
I
know.
think they'll get to him some, so it's not going to be by a lot. I don't think he's going to throw for over 3, but I think 270, 280 probably happens.
Bill, 31.5 rushing yards.
Over.
Do you like the by committee approach?
It's worked. It's not my favorite thing. I always wonder, like, yes, it has worked. It's been effective. So, there's this axiom of it ain't broke, don't fix it. Could it be working more in another way? Right. I'd like to see more Ja'Cory Krosky Merritt right now. I
Yeah.
just think he's their best running back.
That being said, Chris Rodriguez read that huge run and then got like 5 touches the rest of the game, something
Well,
like that.
that's the other problem with the committee, right? It goes, whoever's hot, then you're not getting more work. Now, I've been a Chris Rodriguez guy since day one. Like I really, really like him. That particular play, which was a good run, it was good vision, it was good patience, it was perfectly blocked, and like
Yes.
that was pretty much schemed up for a home run for the. So I think Ja'Cory, I think probably McNichols, a lot of them get that gain, but I'm a big Rodriguez guy.
I am too. McConkey, 58.5 receiving yards.
I'll say over. He has really struggled this year. He's dropped some passes. He's their third targeted receiver behind both Keenan Allen and Quentin Johnston.
It's
But I'll say
crazy.
over.
And then Ertz anytime touchdown.
No, I normally don't put anytime touchdowns in parlays just because of the odds. But I like the idea. He's caught a couple touchdowns. Jaden coming back, obviously. But I'll say no to that. I think it's going to be a lowish scoring game, honestly. Like I'm thinking 20-17 ish, something like that. So I only got a chance at 2 tutties, so I'll probably leave him off of that.
So the Chargers haven't given up more than 21 points in a game. So to get you out of here, you like the score to be 2017?
Yeah, I think so. Something like that. Low 20s, high teens. What's the total in the game?
Over under is 46.5. They're currently getting 2.5 points.
Yeah, so I like the under more than I like anything else, I think, in this game, probably. But I also, sneaky. I got last week wrong. I had Washington winning. I wasn't convinced. So on their games this year, I had them losing to Green Bay. I think I'm 3-1. But this is a game. We'll see. Maybe I'll be wrong back to back weeks. I think they win this game. I think that the Washington pass rush will do enough against the Chargers offensive line. And like you could say, oh, well, the Chargers have this, this, this. They did last week against the Giants team that's not any good, too. And the Giants just happened to whoop their butt up front. And they kind of derailed everything. So that's what I'm banking on for the Commanders.
Grant, I appreciate you, buddy. This is always great.
Thank you. Yeah, good talking. Good catching up.
Yeah, man. Have a good one.
Appreciate you, bud.